took the slogan, as you say, from Brazilian rural workers. I used it in a slightly different sense than theirs, but not totally. What they meant is, look, we're living in a cage. This is during the dictatorship, very harsh circumstances. The landowners and military forces, very violent. These are extremely repressed people. So we're living in a cage, but there are things we can do to expand the floor of the cage. That's what they were doing when they were trying to form the rural unions, farm workers unions, and so on. I borrowed it in a slightly different context. It was in the context of anarchist critiques of relying on state power to improve and protect circumstances of working people, the poor, vulnerable populations, women, children, and so on. And my feeling is you should support those. And there are people who think of themselves as principled anarchists who say you shouldn't because we're opposed to state power. So the analogy that I was trying to express was that the cage is kind of a state. The cage is the state, and it is repressive, I agree. But outside that cage, there's a saber-toothed tiger, namely private capital, which wants to get in there and tear you to shreds. So you need the cage, and you can expand the floor of it. You can get more reforms, and this is quite concrete. So things like safety and health reforms, or inspectors for mines where horrible accidents take place all the time, or a National Labor Relations Board intervention to slightly improve the conditions under which union elections can take place, or social benefit problem, pensions, health care, and so on. I think it's fair to regard that as kind of expanding the floor of the cage, and I think it's the right thing to do. In fact, if you look at the old, serious anarchist journals, like, say, Freedom in London, if a large part of each issue is devoted to expanding the floor of the cage in this respect, or at least keeping it from contracting, so defending workers' rights, pensions, and so on. And as far as reform, this is reformist, but as far as reform and revolution are concerned, I've never seen that as a conflict. In fact, if it's going to be a meaningful social revolution, one that'll have a positive outcome, I think it's pretty likely, maybe almost certain, that it will be after the population has come to understand, a very large part of it has come to recognize we've reached the limits of reform. Now, there's no reason why anybody should turn to revolution if reform is still possible. Revolution is dangerous, ugly, uncertain, terrible consequences possible. If the mechanisms of the society still permit expanding the floor of the cage, then I think you should do it. And only when resistance to reform is so strong that you just can't go any further, only then, and when that is recognized by people, will there be the basis for a revolution that has some hope for the future. So as far as I can see, they're the same different stages of the same process.